Thank you for auditing the unedited, always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor whose family is quiet in the background as we are celebrating Father's Day. Part of what I asked for was the ability to do this video on Michael by Killer Mike, and it's sort of on purpose. Killer Mike is one of the better, sort of most realistic people in music who talks about fatherhood, I think in a very real and interesting and engaging way. So it makes sense I would review his album on Father's Day. Now, I am going to get to the album. It's lyrically incredibly strong, very well produced, very interestingly produced. I think there's a lot of live instrumentation here, lots of gospel feel, very lush, very epic, very Atlanta. Reminds me a lot of production and sort of inspired by people from the dungeon in Atlanta. It's got a unique atmosphere. I can't think of any other album that feels like this. We have one of the great humanists in hip-hop making a very humanist album, in particular emphasizing themes of empathy. I would say almost nobody in hip-hop uses empathy and elicits empathy as well as Killer Mike. I'm thinking about his verse talking about getting stopped by the police in front of his family from a couple albums ago from Run the Jewels, and on this album it is all over the place. I think only Kendrick Lamar is in his lane in terms of the ability to elicit, ask for, and show the value of empathy, and I think this album, I think you could compare it to Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers in the way that it has that feeling. It's this great cinematic feeling. It feels like it's one huge lesson and life story, but it's a little bit lighter. It's a little bit, I hate to say it, but maybe more listenable, maybe more day-to-day than Mr. Morale. But before I get to a real emphasis analysis, I don't edit, so before I get to the emphasis or the analysis, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Now, this might not be an elephant for everybody. But if you are like me and you spend a fair amount of time on YouTube in leftist spaces, and in particular if you are quite interested by black leftist spaces, then Killer Mike is a very interesting figure. And this album is released at a time where his existence, his statute as a great black leftist is in question. So I want to talk about the cover of the album. And first of all, before we get too mad, I am going to leave most of this conversation in links to other black content creators who are discussing this issue. Not to me. I'm not the arbiter of this. But I am interested in this sort of divide. And I think this album, I think I can bring some perspective to this album in a way centering it around this concept of the cover, which is him at 9 years old, Michael, as having a little angel halo and devil horns. And I think the way he means it, is the sort of traditional church and street division between the sort of angelic going to church and loving your grandmother and making it in society, and then the devil is, being lured in by money, being lured in by, life selling drugs. But I think with somebody as political and as visible as Killer Mike, there's a different angel and devil here. There is Angel Bernie and Devil Kemp. Let me explain. So if you don't know, Killer Mike really supports Bernie Sanders to the point where, and this is 100% true, my kids, they want me to support Bernie. My wife wants me to support Bernie. Everybody wanted me to support Bernie, but I wasn't quite sure. I wasn't quite sure if he was electable enough. I liked a lot of his theories. And then I saw his hour-long or 40-minute-long interview with Killer Mike, and I'm not exaggerating, that is why I voted for Bernie. It is because of Killer Mike, the way that he phrased it, the way that he showed him off, the way that he helped to elicit his sort of true self, I don't know what. That's what convinced me to vote for Bernie. Then between Killer Mike and my kids and my family, I ended up donating to Bernie's campaign. I still get text messages like every day from different people trying to say, hey, you gave money to Bernie, give money to us. So it was a real betrayal for a lot of people that this same person who came out and said, I support Bernie Sanders, and was really a face of the Sanders campaign, I think I'd say the most meaningful rap endorsement that there's ever been. And I'm riffing here. I think Jay-Z and Beyonce for Obama was important, but I'm not sure how much that really motivated people to vote. In a similar way, Kanye liking Trump might have pushed some people towards Trump, but I doubt it. But really, he was like a wing of the Sanders campaign. So, a couple years later, he goes and he meets with Kemp, the governor of Georgia, And he says, quote, "He seemed like a principled human being when I talked to him." Now, I'm going to show you a picture of Governor Kemp, just to give you an idea of the kind of guy that Brian Kemp is, okay? See this right here? Look at him laughing with all those nice people in their church. They're so laughing and smiling and happy. Let's read what this is about. Republican Governor Brian Kemp of Georgia on Thursday signed several education bills into law, including one banning the instruction of divisive concepts pertaining to race in classrooms. Which means Killer Mike, one of the greatest explainers, illustrators of structural racism in rap history, he's not just conscious, he is very talented at communicating and teaching through his lyrics, gave vocal support to the guy who signed the Don't Say Black law in Georgia, okay? Look at that guy's face, okay? That smiling devil, that's the guy that Killer Mike said seemed a principled human being when I talked to him. So obviously, this is an issue. This is that angel and devil thing. What do we do with Killer Mike? If we support leftist causes, if we fight against structural racism. The issue, I think, is that it often goes through, I'm still working here. So as I said, don't take my word for it. Listen to other people who are smarter and more affected by this and actually live the problems that we're talking about. I highly suggest watching a video from FD Signifier where he describes Killer Mike as becoming something of a radical centrist. I'll include a link to that in the description. He calls him a Ben Shapirian, black people should solve their own issues kind of figure. Sort of personal responsibility. FD Signifier goes into great detail about how it's not that the question of personal responsibility is never discussed in black circles. Of course it is, but it is not discussed in opposition to, in replacement of fixing structural issues. He kind of goes after Killer Mike for supporting Greenwood Bank, and Greenwood Bank is this bank which is theoretically a black-owned bank, but it is in fact white-owned. Another good video on this topic is from Mayowa's World. I think I pronounced her name correctly, where she discusses the conscious to conservative pipeline in rap music. Brilliant term. You take Ice Cube, and we go, if we take Ice Cube as the easiest example, and really what we start to see is this sense of betrayal. And what she said, which I think may be true, I don't know, is that a lot of rap artists use being conscious as a kind of grift. As she says, being radical is a come-up. I don't think that's the case with Killer Mike, but I do think it is true if you want to gain access to certain realms of white power and white capital, often being conscious gets the support of people like me. So was it all just a grift all along? I don't think so. Finally, a third video which I really suggest you watch, a much smaller channel, Black Power Media, called Killer Mike in Cop City, talks more about his position in Atlanta. But let's find the answer. Okay, I think I found the answer. How do we get to the answer of reconciling this angel Bernie and this devil Kemp? For that answer, I'm going to take you to a decidedly not black media source, Fortune magazine. I'm going to send you a link in the description to an interview that he did with Tony Ressler, the $6 billionaire who bought the Atlanta Hawks, okay? And the whole video is Killer Mike explaining why he supports capitalism or why he doesn't fight against capitalism. We're talking about somebody who did more for Bernie Sanders' campaign, I think, than anybody, okay? Why is he on this Fortune video talking about capitalism? And this is the end point that he makes, which is what I think, in my opinion, as somebody who is not personally affected by any of this, somebody who is a comfortable, middle-class, white dude. So my perspective, my opinion, it's not worth nothing, but it's not instructive because I'm not being affected. But I would put this much more in the angel category because the way he describes it, he supports capitalism because it is the system. So he wants to work within the system to do the best he can. It's a centrist perspective, I know. It's maybe a middle-aged perspective. There's not a lot of middle-aged anarchists, okay? There's just not. And if they are, they're usually like that kind of cool guy who works at the coffee shop, who has like the weird ear spacer deals, but doesn't have the spacer in there, so it's just kind of dripping down. And, hey, never let the party die, okay? Maybe it's an ageist thing. But in this interview, so first of all, he describes that. And then he describes this book, The Devil You Know, where he essentially is promoting a book whose thesis is that African Americans should move back to the South because it's better to be around overt racists who you can work with, whose racism is understood, than it is to deal with well-meaning white liberals whose racism is more insidious and is more hidden. Essentially, me. Stop dealing with me and start dealing with Brian Kemp, the devil you know. So, hey, the most important thing, and this is why I like all of the people who I've sent you to, none of it is reductive. Any of the anger is not like, he's lame, cancel. It's not that at all. It's a very complex question because fundamentally the problem comes back to, and I discussed this when I discussed the song Run from last year, which is on this album, being a black celebrity is a very difficult position to be in, especially when you are seen as a voice of the people. This is why Kendrick left, I think, this kind of expectation. How can you be a human and a symbol at the same time? So, with all that put into context, these different angels and devils, I think in terms of this album, the angel is the angel of confidence. He is just somebody who is confident in his position, confident in his life, in his ability to tell stories. And the devil is a certain defensiveness. I think a defensiveness that came about when he started showing overt support for Brian Kemp. Now, in his mind, what he did was he talked to somebody, he pays taxes, and he wanted to see what his taxes does, and that's great. But dude, stop fronting. You absolutely were supporting him. Showing up, shaking hands, smiling. You are supporting him. It doesn't matter how much you think that you're getting into the system. You can't do it. You can't do it. You can't do it. So don't... it's not the same thing as James Brown meeting with Nixon, but it is not as different as you would like it to be. That's just the way that it is when you allow yourself to be co-opted by people in power. So I'd say the devil is the defensiveness. And thankfully on this album, there's very little defensiveness. Like Dave Chappelle, right? I love Dave Chappelle. I think he's hilarious. I think a lot of things he said are abhorrent. I think those things can exist at the same time. His comedy specials are good now, directly. How much of it is him defending the anti-wokeness is bad and terrible and unwatchable and cringy on the most cringiest level. And then the good stuff is everything else. Like you get the feeling that there's like this slide where you just can eventually just slide, and then you wake up and you look in the mirror and Bill Maher is staring at you in the face, okay? One of my favorite verses on this album is about tears in your face. And if I were Killer Mike, I would not fear seeing myself and my regret. I would fear looking into the mirror and seeing Bill Maher staring back at you. It can happen. It can happen to the best leftists. Bill Maher's done tons of good for the world, and look at him now. A final interview. Okay, this is why I call my reviews essays, okay? Because I've also done a lot of work here. I'm trying to come up with a full, complete picture to best understand. The final interview to watch is the one that he did last week with the Breakfast Club in New York, where he explains that confidence comes from the fact that he did not grow up in a multiracial part of Atlanta, that all of his teachers were black, everyone in his world was black, so he never lost whatever kind of confidence one loses when living in white supremacy while being not white, he never had. He describes in this interview how he grew up with his grandparents, how they were educated middle class, how he had a teenage mom. He explains something about this album, which you don't need him to explain it to you. When you listen to this album, you know it's a movie. It feels like a movie. It sounds like a 70s soundtrack at times. It sounds like a gospel movie at times. As he says, it is the origin of the superhero. The way he explains it, other albums were about who he is, and this is an album about who he was. Which is why I think it's less defensive than it could have been. I was really afraid this was just going to be him being like, that's right, I'm a landlord. I said I'm a landlord, and I said it. There's only a little bit of that right here. Apparently a lot of it was done with his partner Cuz Lightyear, produced by No ID, one of the great producers in rap history. He says he spent $500,000 making this album, which I believe, and there is that kind of grandness to it. And one weird thing is that you'll see Rap Capital back here by Joe Coscarelli, one of the better hip-hop books, in my opinion, and I've read a ton. In particular, his work on Migos really helps you to better understand Migos and trap rap in general. Killer Mike is barely in the book, but that kind of makes sense. But there are times this album feels like it's trying to be Atlanta, but it's actually not super Atlanta. It's like, it's clear. He said he went to LA to make the album better, and that comes through. And having it executive produced by No ID, who's like one of the most New York producer guys that you could possibly imagine, it kind of helps it to not feel like, it doesn't have that feeling of like, this is my statement about Atlanta. It's more just a very Atlanta album that is not afraid to not be purely Atlanta. His final word about what this album is that it is a generational statement. That makes sense. It seems that he is making an album about his generation. He's probably roughly around my age, maybe a little bit younger, I can't tell. He's in his 40s, And in particular about the Southern black middle class, lower middle class experience. And it does seem that he has made that statement. It is interesting because I know his work. Well, first I know his song Ronald Reagan, because that's one of my favorite rap songs, because he was the first rapper to really help put point the finger at the person who's responsible for a lot of the things that we're living through is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Wilson Reagan, 6 letters in each of his name. Coincidence? Yes, he was the devil without 666. But without LP, it's just his voice and his flow can be tiring. So what I like about this album is that it acknowledged that, and it always has just the right amount of guest appearances, features, just the right amount of singing, and the final thing that comes clear with this album is that it's not for me. So I do like it, but I don't think it's trying to exclude me, but I think, and he says it a couple times up. Sorry, I keep hitting my wife's plant over here. It's Father's Day. He keeps saying it, he keeps using the N-word referring to the people he's singing to and about, and that word is intentional because I can't even say that word. And it's not, obviously, my mouth can form those words, but he's making it clear that this is for a black audience. And that I think the way it was produced, the way it was made, it feels that way. And puts me at a slight distance, but then also helps me to appreciate it more because I can appreciate when things are not for me and just sort of say, that must, as the kids say, hit different, and it should hit different for different people. So let's go track by track. Let's start off with wait, before that? I'm really making you wait. I need to do better promotion. So this is my mug. You can get that. It's the only piece of merch left. It's my hand wash mug. My daughter is wearing the only Professor Skye V-neck that ever sold. So no one likes my other merch. Please subscribe. Please smash the like bucket. Okay. If you sign up for notifications, you get to see the fake titles that I give every video for like 10 seconds and then I take them off. So that's the things you can do. I really do appreciate support. I would love a bunch of support for this. Now let's get into the song Down by Law. It's my sample song, my stamp. Click above the banana, above the Coscarelli book to hear the song Down by Law. Now first of all, we have Rico Wade making his appearance, speaking here. This is that Atlanta thing. If you read the book Rap Capital, you realize Rico Wade, the person who owned the dungeon, maybe the person who bears the most responsibility for the explosion of rap music in Atlanta, certainly of the Dungeon School. So hearing him talking is beautiful. It connects through history, helps you understand. And then there's a church organ, and then CeeLo Green comes in, and he starts singing, and it reminds me a lot of Curtis Mayfield, who I really enjoy. It even sounds like it might be a Curtis Mayfield loop, but then some trap hi-hats hit. And again, hearing trap beats on Atlanta music, even if it's someone who's not a trap artist, is great because it's still Atlanta art, right? And just he starts right off with just hello my, and then just says N-word over and over again. My daughter said, "This is not a song I would pick for karaoke." Pretty funny. Starts off kind of preachy. Stop sipping yellow, my you itching and twitching and glitching, my So a little preachy about don't do this. But then he gets more sort of philosophical. It's hard. Done giving up on God. Maybe God gave up on us. Maybe she angry worshiping all these false idols. So devil's just preying on us. This for the junkie, the fiend, and the loser, praying to God in the back of the cruiser. And while he's saying these lines that are very full of emotion and empathy, right, for the junkie and the fiend and the loser, which we'll come back to later, these horns are just so emotional. And it really does feel like Curtis Mayfield. And if you don't know Curtis Mayfield's work, if you only know Superfly, do yourself a favor. Go right now. Stop watching this video and listen to some Curtis Mayfield. There's No Place Like America Today, I think is the name of my favorite album of his. It's the one of the people in the breadline on the cover. I don't even remember the name of the album. But just an amazing singer who's able to give you that feeling where it feels like it's soul, but also it feels like it's gospel at the same time. I was so young when I stood at the store, I did not know the money you paid me was meant for your babies, and now they just pour. So talking about the regret of being a crack dealer, and he's talking a lot about being a crack dealer in his youth, and he talks about the consequences of that. But more importantly, he talks about his own naivete, how he didn't know at the time. It's a helicopter. It's weird. It's the first time in like 1,000 videos there's ever been a helicopter flying overhead. Kind of interesting verse about his relationship with white people, referring to them by the C word, I'll just say it, referring to us as crackers, which goes into some interesting themes, sort of sexuality and fear and love. And then he gets to just a full, like, super Black History Month, just set of lyrics of just shooting out names, Betty Shabazz, Coretta Scott. And then one of my favorite lines, it really emphasizes the gospel soul. Because this whole album, it's a rap album, but it feels a lot more to me like an R&B gospel album where someone happens to be rapping. Moving like Malcolm and Martin and King, Lift Every Voice is the song I sing. So Lift Every Voice, if you don't know it, it's a song people sing in church. Now, I didn't know that this was like a famous song in black churches. I just know that, I went to a church so white I called it the Wasp Nest because it's just white Anglo-Saxon Protestant up the wazoo. Okay, we're talking Episcopalian, we're talking starched collars, all of that. But we have a great organist, truly world-class organist, like organist that makes you want to just sell all your clothes and follow God, And one time in our church we sang "Lift Every Voice." And it was one of the greatest emotional experiences I have ever had in a church, and one of the greatest musical experiences I've ever had in church. And it didn't matter that we were as diverse as a box of saltines, but it didn't matter. Like the song itself was so powerful. The soul of that, the humanity of that. Every once in a while, I get goosebumps, and I show it to the audience. This is that case because I'm remembering what it was like singing "Lift Every Voice." I'm trying to think if I want to. Yeah, every once in a while, you're going to see me look at my notes, and then I'm going to decide not to, because I just wrote down too many lyrics, because there's too many great lyrics on this album, but I don't want to bore you just by doing lyrics. CeeLo Green is awesome. He's singing. The hope is that this is going to become a hit. I think it could be. He says, "This ish is so Atlanta," and then we have the sound of crickets, which I assume is a lot like Atlanta. So that's your first track right there. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see how he's setting us up with all these stories and this grandness that's happening in his whole life and his whole story? It makes sense as a superhero story. Shed Tears, produced by No ID, featuring Mozzie, starts off with a quote from a 70s movie, "The Spook Who Sat by the Door." Then it's a very... Okay, so I talk about it all the time, but Kanye is everywhere. Kanye is everywhere and Kanye is nowhere, right? I believe this is the same sample that is used on Power, "It's Your Thing" by Cold Grits. And then that drum sample is matched with a gospel single from the Clark Sisters. So when you have somebody matching together a really good sample with a really good drum sample, you obviously think of Kanye. But of course, No Idea is one of his mentors, so maybe it's actually No Idea who deserves the credit. And this is where he's talking about, barely could help my mama, how could I be a father, daily getting harder, have mercy. Every week something hitting me adversely. I remember dropping my babies off at the church nursery. This is what I'm talking about, why this is a good Father's Day album, because he's talking about the difficulty of being a father. Even if you didn't grow up in extreme material adversity, the feeling of being a father, how overwhelming it is, dropping your babies off at the church nursery, it shows a maturity and an understanding of life's experiences. And yeah, it's a very, very moving verse. And then he does a thing a couple times, 3 times as a matter of fact. Whenever rap historians and academics, if you have to say what is the best rap verse of all time, there's 2 answers. One is the correct answer, and then the second answer is somebody trying to be cute, saying it's some other verse. The answer is the Child is Born verse by Melly Mel off The Message. Just absolutely nothing will ever beat it. Ever, ever, ever. Okay? Nah, what about the Control verse? Get out of here. Okay, nothing will ever beat Melly Mel's verse. What about Eric B for president? Well, that might. That comes close, but no. Okay? And part of what makes it so good, I mean, it's a weird story, right? Because the whole song was made and Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five had nothing to do with the song. It was all Duke Booty. Except he heard this one verse from a different song and Melly Mel just redid it again. But then that's the verse that really establishes the song, that really helped rap go into a different direction. A child is born, no state of mind, blind to the ways of mankind. God's smiling, but he's crying too, because only God knows what you'll go through, right? That whole thing. Micro Machines. So a couple times, 3 times on this album, he allows the whole song to end. And then he does a last verse. And that last verse is your haymaker. That is your Child is Born. That is your, you thought I was making definitive statements about blackness and growing up in adversity and inequality and maturity and fatherhood and self-realization. I was fooling, because now I get to the real thing. I shed tears every morning in the bathroom mirror, face to face with fate, had to face my fears. It was me, I'm the reason that I fell. That was hell, locked in self-guilt like a jail. Bam, right there. I shed tears every morning in the bathroom mirror, face to face with my fate, had to face my fears. You could totally do it like Melly Mel, and it would totally work. That was hell, locked up in a self-guilt like jail. Just great. And this gospel is everywhere, and the singing and the moving. It is an amazing, amazing verse, an amazing song. Do you see how all that preamble that I had in the beginning is basically washed away? Like, this is not a camp album. It's not a Bernie album either, for that matter, but it's definitely not a camp album. Next track is called Run, which I already did an entire video on. I'll include a link to it at the end of this video and in the description. The main thesis that I had was that we need to protect black artists, even when we disagree with them, that we need to protect them, like we need to protect Dave Chappelle, and we need to protect Killer Mike, and we need to protect Kanye West in a different way than we protect that. Anyway, watch that video if you want me to explain that. Maybe you're mad at me for saying that. I still criticize, still call out, but there's a viciousness and I believe, a systematic desire to destroy black celebrities, which is co-opted, which co-opts our reasonable desire for progress in society. So go watch that video if you want to. Or you can just unsubscribe, I guess. And then subscribe again. I'm doing all this on Father's Day. I could be chill. My kids are over there playing Zelda right now, being dead quiet. I told them if they want to talk to each other, they have to text each other, okay? That's what I'm doing. They're trying to like track down Zonai armor, all that stuff. Shh. Shh. Daddy's talking about Killer Mike. Shh. All right. Next song is called Enrich. I get it. Enrich. So N like the N-word, but also like to enrich. This is where we're getting a little bit of that defensive devil coming in here. I do like the opening quote from Omar bin Hassan, but it's sort of more of that kind of personal responsibility stuff. You know, N's do a lot of shooting drugs, shooting each other, some African drums in the back, but then some real soulful, real instruments come in. I think there's a lot of real instruments on this album. I think that's intentional. I think it's trying to sound like The Dungeon, because that's how early Outkast sounded. That's how early Goody Mob would be. It was like how The Dungeon made music, was by hiring real instrumentations. Jesus was an N-word. My N-word kill him. My N-word rose. Great lyric. Can't say it in karaoke, but a great lyric. I know you love me running the jewels, but these my N-word flows. I think this is where he's telling me, and you like me. Statistically, if you're watching this, probably a white guy too. What's up? These flows are not for us. And then he takes us on a little movie rant here. And I want to, first of all, thank him. Because Boaz Yakin, or Boaz Yakin, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, movie Fresh, is absolutely head and shoulders above the majority of so-called hood cinema. So he says, watch Fresh, not Scarface, Blow, or New Jack City. Because Fresh is about like using your intelligence to get out. It's about being given a rotten situation, about participating in the oppression of your own people while figuring out ways to get out and hopefully help them. It really does make sense that really this is a little wink from Killer Mike to say, hey, this whole album is just Fresh. You didn't have to even listen to this album. This is just Fresh, but in Atlanta. He makes reference to Greenwood Bank a couple times on this album. He shoots it out. Again, it's complex. It's complex because, yes, capitalism is the system that we live in, but then also one could argue that capitalism particularly hurts marginalized people, and so therefore supporting it so much could be seen as supporting marginalization. I'm not the guy to talk about that, but I'm the guy to say that's a question. We should be celebrated. That's that defensiveness. Someone who I call Six-Lack, but I know you pronounce it Black, but his name is Six-Lack, and that's how I've always said it. He's got such a great voice. Again, different sides of Atlanta coming into this album all over the place. Like, because that's the thing, you know? Like, when you read Rap Capital, there's so many different sides to Atlanta. You know, I taught that rap class, and I thought I was going to talk about Atlanta for one day, but it ended up being 3 days, and I could have done an entire semester because it's like, it is the rap capital. We don't want it to be. We want it to be New York City, but let's be honest. Let's be honest, New Yorkers. It's Atlanta, and this album helps to show how. There's a little bit. The biggest flaw of this album is at times, and this happens with theme albums, it's a little indulgent. And this happens at the end with the singing outro. Like they're sort of so in love with the grandness of their vision that maybe they could have done a little better with a little more trimming. Talking That Ish by DJ Paul of 3-6 Mafia. This is the most devil song on the album, the most defensive devil song, you know. Starts off with someone saying, apparently Killer Mike has gone to sleep, saying he isn't woke, and it starts off with these Bill Maher style. I think actually, you know what? Bill Maher wrote these lyrics. Obviously he didn't write the N-words in here, but he wrote the lyrics with the exception of the N-words for Killer Mike, and he sent them to him by email. N-words talk to me about that woke-ass ish. Some N-words walking on some broke-ass ish. You see, your words ain't worth no money. I ain't spoke back itch. All of you N-words hang together on some broke back ish. How good is my Bill Maher impression? You know, so like, so many things happening here. You know, like, attacking wokeness is just like... You know what? This actually helps me to better understand FD Signifier's point. Because FD Signifier was mad that Killer Mike was talking about the politics of personal responsibility with white audiences because it's not like the black community, like every other community on planet Earth, doesn't have its own issues that it discusses amongst itself, but to be judged by that in the greater superstructure of white supremacy is, you know, really unfair and ends up being capitalized and taken, saying, see, Killer Mike says it's not the structure's fault, it's your individual fault, right? So I get that. And here, it's like, you know, I'm woke, but like, I would never say I'm woke because all the idiots who talk about being woke are usually, you know, So like the way he's attacking, the way a great figure of the left is attacking the term woke, makes you feel like you could be a Brian DeSantis listener. Ron Ron DeSantis could, like, finally a rapper is talking about, this is Killer Mike's albums where woke goes to die. You know, like, you could sort of say that. And no, don't say that. Don't attack woke. But anyways, that's the defensive bit. This is issues that just go on and on. And also, I'm not a big fan of the casual homophobia, you know, saying broke back-ish. You know, we get it, but like, you know. But then it's cool because he references Juvenile and 400 Degrees, and so he's like doing sort of a whole Southern rap thing here with the producer from Memphis of 3 6 Mafia and Juvenile of Hot Boys. You know, like it ends up being kind of a cool Southern thing, and then it gets slowed down and gets really sort of twisted. And then what I like here is that he scales back, or at least he explains himself a little bit better. He says he's trying to get it like the late Herman Russell. And I think that's the key to understanding Killer Mike. It's like he tried to help socialism take over in America, but now he wants to be Herman Russell. And if you don't know Herman Russell, I don't blame you. He's a very successful black entrepreneur from Atlanta. You've heard of Ted Turner. You haven't heard of Herman Russell. Well, that's part of the reason why. First rule you better understand, you're dealing with a real black man. If I said it, I meant it like I said it because I said what I said. Understand? Some of the great play and flow of Killer Mike. I haven't even explained the flow. He has... The thing that's unfair about Killer Mike is you hear him talk and just his voice. Even if he didn't do anything. If he just read the phone book, you'd be like, damn, he's spitting fire. But that's unfair. He really uses his voice really well. He knows how to have the great flow like he does right there. The kind of cute sort of punchline of that, which is all over Run the Jewels and is not as much in this album. Next song's called Summer, featuring Jagged Edge, going all the way back. R&B soul group from Atlanta. High kind of gospel sample. Very sort of yay-ish. Again, some nice low drill beat underneath. The Jagged Edge vocals all the way through. This is that empathy stuff I'm talking about. So he's talking about the consequences of having unprotected sex as a teenager. You know, it's the teenage love, making love, no glove. It's the abortion money, gotta get it up. Whoa, okay. Oh, okay. All right, hey, what's up? Glad you supported Kemp, who's probably trying to overthrow Roe v. Wade in your state. It's okay. And he has that beginning, and then he hits you with his next child is born moment. Literally. His next, the message, Melly Mel, child is born, final punch. You thought he was talking about these issues? Listen to these lyrics. Because all that raw dog sex, and I knew I would get you pregnant, all this teenage love is really just about possessing. They call it adolescence because we learn in adult lessons. What's that meme of the guys going, oh, right? That's what this is where if I edited my videos, I'd put in that meme. Oh, you know? What a damn. Teenage love is really just about possessing? You know? That's a very deep line. I think we could extend it to many forms of love. That doesn't matter. He's talking about his own responsibility. And then at the end of the verse, and if I had known your mother was never going to let you keep it, I wouldn't have told my partners. I would have kept it a secret. It's the tragedy of teenage pregnancy. It's the tragedy of abortion. It's the tragedy of the life that he had and the life that he ended. And all of these things all happening at once. And it's the true story. And it's the reason why, if you are a leftist, do not dismiss Killer Mike because he supports Brian Kemp. I know it's hard because Brian Kemp is one of them son of a bitches you just wish would go away but isn't. But this is why. Because this is really important work on empathy and sexual autonomy while also talking about personal responsibility for both the men and so many things happening here that don't happen. You know, Brenda's got a baby. All right, that was a start. That was what? 108 years ago, Tupac released that song. Next song is called Science and Engineers. This is the one that everyone skips to. How can you blame them? Produced by No ID, James Blake, and Andre 3000. Murderers Row of producers. It's basically 3 songs. Starts off with the first song, which, as he explained on the Breakfast Club, is produced by James Blake and Andre 3000. Are they coming out with an album soon? The second part is No ID and Future, which is a combo you never thought you'd hear. And then for his part, he has DJ Paul. So, and all the way throughout, we have Erin Allen, who's just been the voice. As he said on the Breakfast Club interview, she is the voice of the album. She is all over the place. and her strong female, I don't know if she was a gospel singer, if she was trained as a gospel singer, I don't know what it is, but whatever it is that gospel singers can do, she can do that thing where she opens her voice and you're like, maybe I should worship Jesus. That kind of voice that can just do that. So that's all the way throughout the album, and it's just the whole thing. I mean, the opening part with these 80s synthesizers and arpeggiated keyboards, and just we were listening to this. I was listening to this while preparing for the video, and the kids were playing Zelda. And my son just like, damn, this is a good song. I was like, yeah, this is the Andre 3000 verse. So it's not like the rest of it wasn't good. But Andre 3000, I don't think he's trying. Like, I don't think he tries to body people when he does verses. I mean, every rapper does, but he doesn't seem vindictive. He just seems like, oops, I did it again. Communication coming in too much that I can't communicate with all of them. I do wish I had scientists or engineer friends. Let's go, get out of here. Petrol's cheaper than it's ever been. I would, if I could, I would do the entire verse for you, but you should just listen to it. I do like the idea of having scientists and engineers as friends. This is maybe another element of white privilege, or power privilege, right? Wealth privilege as well. Just, I have friends that are scientists and engineers. I'm married to scientists for that matter. But it is true that if you don't grow up in an area of hyper education and then get hyperly educated, then you're not often surrounded by people who are hyper educated. There's a sort of education divide in addition to a class and race divide. And here, Andre 3000 is talking about that. Future comes. Future brings his A game here. He's still Future, still talking about Lambos and bandos and all that stuff, but who cares? It's just having Future on here. It's like Andre 3000, Future, Ed, Killer Mike. This book just exploded with joy. Okay, like Joe Coscarelli, just he saw this song existed, and he must have just freaked out. Okay, because it's like everything in that book all coming together at one. Of course. If you don't know, Future started in the dungeon as well. Rico Wade is related to Future. So you can think that Outkast Atlanta used to be good rap. It used to be Outkast. Now it's just things like Future. Go to hell. Future's great. And Future comes from the same place as Outkast. So don't even bring your snobbery. Anyways. That was like my biggest disappointment when I was interviewing Billy Woods, when I asked him if he listened to Future, and he sort of looked at me like, why would I listen to Future? You don't listen to Future? Future is great. But I wouldn't listen to Future either if I didn't do this channel. And then Killer Mike comes on, and Killer Mike very clearly understood that he had to be on a verse with Future, and so he comes hard. Music, computers, and rubbers, and looters, and looters, and shooters with Rugers, and shooters with Ruger CDs, and my tours, and tutors, and tutors, my Timber Miracle. Just, all right, he was driving, he was in fifth gear. He was going fast. And then Andre 3000 jumped on the album. He was like, oh, there's another gear. Bam! Just music, computers, and Rubers, and looters, and shooters, and Rugers, and Glugers. Yeah, just great. Great verse. You can lie, cheat, and still kill in America. Be celebrated like Captain America. And then all the way throughout, we have that Erin. Is it Erin? I want to get her name correct. I'd never heard of her before. Apparently, according to Breakfast Club, she was introduced to Killer Mike by Hannibal Buress. And Hannibal Buress is one of my personal heroes. I think he's a really interesting, very funny guy. Yes, Aaron Allen. I want to make sure that's correct. Okay. 2 Days is the only song on the album that's just like, oh, that's just a song. Great. 60s organ. Drums are pretty interesting. Some gospel sounds. Ty Dolla $ign's on here. I love Ty Dolla $ign when he's a guest appearance. They do a thing where they match Tyler sings what he's rapping underneath. It goes just great. Spaceship Views. Another guest appearance by Currency, pretty good. Killer Mike has a fast style. 2 Chainz is fine. Hitting kind of a low point in the album with these kind of bits here. And then we get to Exit 9. We get back to the personal stuff. Strong bass and drum line with piano. Super solid beat. All the layers of this album. This is talking about his youth selling drugs. And then he says something which means a lot to me. Thank the Lord I ain't a junkie or an alcoholic. All the time, because there's substance abuse in my family, My parents, God rest their souls, drank too much. I often think, like, thank God I'm not an alcoholic. Like sometimes I'll be out at a restaurant, I don't even drink beers when I go to restaurants. And I'm like, I see the price of a beer. I'm like, damn, I'm so glad I don't drink, And I just see like the whole world and just like, I am thankful every day that I'm not an addict. And it's weird because people thank God for not getting cancer, which they should, but addiction can really get you. As I tell my kids all the time, addiction is a terminal disease that you give yourself. So you can conquer your addiction, but you'll still be an addict for the rest of your life. It's a terminal disease, And the fact that he's able to say, this is what I'm talking about, that empathy thing, The Pride of Atlanta, Michael Render studied Ballin. He talks about going from minimum wage to owning his stuff. I think that's the other aspect of this album. It's not just a race thing, it's also a class thing, that he used to work at minimum wage jobs and now he owns his own stuff. And it's about the dream of becoming an owner and a landlord, which is the dream, the capitalist dream. Next song is something for the Junkies. Sorry, did I get... Okay, yeah, that's later. Next song is called Something for the Junkies, which follows up on that line from the last song about thank God I'm not a junkie. And this is just, so in the same way that Auntie Diaries was like one of the songs off Kendrick's album, where you're like, oh wow, well I guess that needed to be said. Good, I'm glad this exists. That's how I feel about Something for the Junkies. I could talk about the trap drums and the ominous sound of pianos, but really it's this song about addicts and losers and substance abusers and how they should have their own song too. Funny thing is, Lyric Genius, whoever was annotating it didn't recognize that it was Farrakhan doing the interstitial bit. You could tell whoever did that didn't grow up in the 90s. If you're my age, I recognize Farrakhan's voice more than I know Kennedy's voice. It's like I could recognize that voice anywhere. It's one of Farrakhan's better speeches because, like many other people, Farrakhan has good things about him, not just the terrible, 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 terrible things. He has a lot of great things as well. He's a man you ought to listen to sometimes. When you see men fall, don't laugh. And that's the theme of the song. When you see men fall, don't laugh. Just, you know what? I'm going to say it one more time. I'm going to be obnoxious because I want Killer Mike's message, as initially said by Farrakhan, to get through to your head, because I think it's the kind of message which you should have tattooed on your brain or on your arm. When you see men fall, don't laugh. Our final Child is Born verse is here, where he talks about his aunt who's a junkie. More importantly, he describes how she passed from powder cocaine to crack, how it happened, how she was smoking since they called it freebasing. Like she talked, essentially we're getting a first-person view of that transition from cocaine in the 70s to crack in the 80s. And I just realized in a lot of ways we could sort of tie that together with another epidemic of the 80s with AIDS. The same kind of idea where sex all of a sudden, particularly for one marginalized population, although not exclusively, hit them super hard. And the rest of the world said, oh, they're being punished for what they were doing in the 70s, when in reality it was this epidemic that came out of nowhere and absolutely destroyed a community, Like when we think about the 80s, and especially with Ronald Reagan's intentional negligence and often direct participation in both of these epidemics, it's crazy. And we need... Sorry. I was looking for the right word and I landed on crazy. Let's see. Let's not say crazy. It's very interesting in this case, in this song, to have a face of the crack epidemic. Somebody who went out and partied and had fun like anybody else. And then like out of nowhere, like a hawk getting a mouse from 2,000 feet, she ends up becoming a crackhead. She say, Michael, you say you love me. I know you mean it because you still treat your junkie auntie like a human being. And that's the whole point. That's that empathy thing. That's that humanity thing. That's the value of Killer Mike, that despite the fact that he sees the humanity in Brian Kemp, which of course Brian Kemp is a human being, I see the humanity in him as well. But my sympathy for him ends when he denies the humanity of others. But that's okay. Gets a little bit indulgent at the end, and then it's back to back with the song Motherless. Okay, so I can't listen to the song. I cannot listen to the song. I can't. Not today. Now I get it, it's called Motherless, but my dad died a couple months ago. It's Father's Day. I was making blueberry pancakes for my kids. I made them with more blueberries than usual because that's how my dad made them for us the one time he ever made pancakes for me in my entire goddamn life because he's too busy drinking and being lazy. But still, that one time he made pancakes, it was a meaningful thing with me and my kids. And I'm sitting here and I'm trying to listen to this song where he's talking about his mother being dead, and it's the same feeling. And the thing that he's able to get in this song, the thing which we all feel, if we're lucky, we are all living long enough to see our parents go, the pain of that. And on the Breakfast Club interview, he didn't want this song on the album. And eternal credit to No ID. Not only did he do Death of Autotune, one of my favorite Jay-Z beats, but No ID said, this album's not done. What are you afraid of? And Killer Mike had never said the words, my mother is dead. He never said them. He said past, transitioned, this or that. He had never said it. He was afraid to say it. So he made the entire song based on that sentence. Organs and drums and guitars. Listen, I'm so sorry, producers. You did a great job on this album, but what am I supposed to do? You're so in the back. When the first line, my mama dead, my grandma dead, to keep it honest, I get depressed, be feeling scared. There it is. Second time this album, you know? Like there it is. And I couldn't listen to it because it's so real. It's that real. And you can feel it. And even on that interview, he started crying, you know? He's crying 4 o'clock in the morning on New York radio. A black boy to a teen, mama, got regarded as a leader by his people, mama. Just beautiful. Just an absolutely beautiful song filled with existential dread, appreciation, regret. A little bit indulgent again. Then we get Don't Let the Devil. This one's produced by LP. This is my favorite beat on the album. So I'm not one of these guys who's just be Run the Jewels. I'm not that guy. Run the Jewels is great, but I like Killer Mike as much as I like Run the Jewels. But this is still the best beat on the album. It could just be that LP is just that good of a producer. What I love about it is that it's in keeping with the rest of the album. It's still gospel-y. It's still soul. But the sample is developed, extended a little bit better. There's something about the production that's just a little bit sharper, a little bit more in keeping with... Maybe it's just because I've heard so much more of LP's production with Killer Mike that I just associate him with that production. Jamie for Mayor, Vote for the Brain, Flair, Be an AR, Spray the Radar, Down Invaders. Typical LP verse, almost singing in the back. And then the album ends with High and Holy, again with Ty Dolla $ign. It seems to start with what I think is some African language. It could be some form of Creole, but I can't place what the language is. Very kind of soulful. Reminds me a little bit of an Isaac Hayes beat. You know, Isaac Hayes, Curtis Mayfield. There's all these great soul musicians who started in the churches, basically all of them. James Brown, whatever. And the music they made in the 70s often was R&B and soul that felt very impacted by gospel music. And this has that kind of feel. It's an amazing end to the album because it ties everything together. It feels very much like an echo of the first song. Realtons, it's my honor to pay you homage and extend the same respect to all your baby mamas because we just trifle, we carry rifles, granny carry Bibles. We carry hatred for our rivals, same as Cain and Abel, talking about killing your neighbors and all that hatred, but also talking about his community and his life. That's why I stay high and holy. And then just this, maybe one last child is born. There is. I'm sorry, there's a 4th child is born verse on here. Men have died for dollars, men have killed for pennies, but too few have made a difference, so their life is finished. Did you love a woman? Did you raise a child? Did you show some love? Did you give a smile? Well, you made them suffer when you didn't deserve it. You effed up, but that's okay, bro. Ain't nobody perfect. Showing empathy even for you, the imperfect person who's lived an imperfect life. Showing empathy for himself. A lot of this album is showing empathy for himself, forgiving himself for his weaknesses and his flaws, and showing how he overcame them through reflection and excellence and work and effort and all those things. An amazingly human album that's more interesting than I thought it was even going to be. And it's great. So every Father's Day, I make my family take me to Pizzeria Uno. Because I would never eat at Pizzeria Uno. Because who the hell wants to eat at Pizzeria Uno? But the secret is, I love Pizzeria Uno. You know? It's one of my absolute favorite places to eat, even though it's kind of cheesy. So they're going to take me to Pizzeria Uno. I'm going to get a Pepsi and a pizza. So happy Father's Day. But Toby's not a father. He had his nuts cut off, didn't you, Toby? Yeah, you did. All right, I'll show you my Patreons. They give me money to buy music, so thank you to them. Speaking of capitalism and all that mess. So I can't figure out. Can you see your name on there? If you're one of the people whose name's on here, is this good enough? I can't tell. I go a lot slower than most YouTubers do. All right, cool. Hey, where are you at in Zelda?
Some stable, and we're talking to a bird dude.
All right, talking to a bird dude at a stable. There's the camera.